Alright, hello everybody. Apparently I can't flip my camera while I'm recording, so you can't see me and this both. So this is the pattern that I chose to work with. It is a McCall pattern from Walmart, just $2.97. And yes, it is for knit fabric, stretch fabric. Okay, so the issue that I usually have with commercial patterns is the torso is too long. This part up in here is usually too long for me because I'm petite. So I usually have to adjust these lines here where it says lengthen and shorten here. So I know what my measurements are because I am in a pattern making class that's not really school. But anyway, I have my measurements, and so I know that there are certain measurements that I'll need to consider. So my front length is 14 and 3/4 inches. And because this pattern has like a little neckline that kind of hangs in the front, I can't measure all this because this section here is actually the facing. So when I measure my 14 and 3/4 inches, I start at this point and go all the way down here. And then because this pattern has a built-in seam allowance of 5/8 inches, I have to add that because it's going to be sewn away. So it'll be 14 and 3/4 inches plus 5/8 inches. And whatever's left on the size that I chose, which is a medium, I'm going to subtract that much. So what I did was I traced this pattern onto drafting paper so that I can make my changes. So what I did was at that top line that we saw here, this top line, that lengthened line, I measured up 2 and 3/8 inches. And I folded my paper. The top line meets, you can't see it because I've already done it and taped it. So it's already been shortened. And when I shortened that, it actually created a little jog here that left that endpoint and that endpoint. So what I had to do is come here, and there's a little dip here. It goes up about, say, maybe an inch, and then it leaves. It goes up about an inch, and then it, from that point it goes out here. So when I sew my waist to the skirt, it's going to take up 5/8 inch seam allowance. But it'll leave like a 1/4 of an inch left that's still kind of straight here before it goes into that bend to go up here. So I ended up connecting this line, making that 4 and 3/4 inches. And so it reshaped my side. And whatever I do on my front, sewers know we have to also do on the back. So what I had to do was the same thing on the back. I had to measure up from my short and lengthened line 2 and 3/8 inches, bring it up, fold it to that point and tape it down. Then I had to come over here and make sure my measurements were the same, the 1 inch and then the 4 and 3/4 inches, and then redraw my line. Now when I cut this out, I will also have to do what's called truing. I have to take this side seam on the back and put it on top of the side seam on the front and make sure the shape is the same so that when I actually cut it out of fabric and sew it up, they'll match up. Another issue that I have with commercial patterns is that the armhole is not long enough. It digs into my armpit, and then I get like deodorant stains on my clothes here. That's because the armhole is not big enough. So what I had to do was I had to go back to my measurements and calculation sheet, and so I know that my armhole is 18.5 inches. And then I divide that in half because I have a front and a back. And then, according to my instructor, Susie Furr, what you have to do is you have to subtract 1/4 of an inch from the front and add it to the back after you've already divided the armhole in half. The reason why you do that is because you want more of the front to show than the back. So when you sew it, it kind of pulls to the back so that you kind of hide the seam. And so with that being said, I know that my back armhole should be 9.5 inches, but I also have to account for seam allowance. So my armhole is going to end up being shortened 5 1/8 inch here and here when I sew my shoulder and when I sew my side. So I have to account for that. So what I did was the 9 1/2 inches that I know I need to have, I added the 1 1/4 to that. The 1 1/4 comes from adding 5/8 inches twice. So I know that when I take my tape measure and I measure this armhole, just walking it along, the tape measure to measure this, it needs to come out on paper as 10 3/4 inches. And it didn't when I did the front and back. So for the back, I had to add 9/16 of an inch in order to make this 10 3/4. Now, I didn't want to mess with this because I've already done my side. I know what it needs to measure, so I don't want to get into this. So what I had to do was I had to extend my shoulder. And I didn't want to mess with the slope because it was already good. So what I did was I added an even 9/16 of an inch to the top all the way across and just extended that armhole line and just kind of used my drafting curve to just continue that curve on up until it met the new line. Did the same thing with the back neckline. And so I maintained the slope of the shoulder. I extended the armhole so that it won't dig in my armpit anymore. Okay? And then the front was a little bit tricky because you got this kind of style design here where the fabric just drapes in the front. So the way the pattern is designed, so you have this kind of weird looking curve that kind of goes over like this because this facing is going to go down the inside, is going to make the front sag. So this here, when I had to extend this armhole to make it bigger, I had to extend this line out and this line out here too, and then I had to continue the curve here. And so after I did those changes, I remeasured the armhole, from the inside with the tape measure, and it measured what I needed to be, which my front armhole should measure 10 1/4 before the seam allowance is taken away at the shoulder and the side. So with those alterations considered, it's looking pretty good so far, and the changes I've made did not interfere with my bust measurement, so I should be pretty good there. And so that's what I have done so far. And what I'll need to do next is to shorten the hem because it'll be too long on me. Because again, I'm only 5'2" petite. So in addition to altering the bodice, I'm going to shorten the sleeves and shorten the hem. So I might do another video. We'll see. But this is my progress so far. Thank you for listening and watching. God bless.